Good morning. How we doing? Fantastic. Well, we are in week 2 of our series, The Good News of Summer. Now, what we're doing is we're diving into the book of Philippians. Now, Philippians is a letter that the Apostle Paul wrote to the church at Philippi. It's a very short letter. In fact, you could probably read it, in 20, 25 minutes. Yet, what's interesting about this letter is 10 different times Paul uses the term good news. He uses the term good news throughout this letter, and I think we can all agree, each and every one of us, that we like good news, right? Who loves good news? We all love it. And sometimes it's not the good news that matters, but it's our perspective of that good news and how we perceive that good news coming to us. Let me give you an example. Cindy walks into the kitchen, being gone to the grocery store, doing some grocery shopping, and she says to her husband, who's somewhat in a hurry, as he passes by, she says, "Sweetheart, do you want the good news or the bad news?" Well, he looks at her and he says, "Baby, I'm in a hurry, so let's just give me the good news, because that's what everybody wants." And she says, "Well, the good news is the airbags in your car are working perfectly." And then she moves on. And you see, perspective matters, doesn't it? It matters with how we look at it. In Philippians 1, I want to give you a little bit of some interesting details about this book and about this letter. Okay, not only Philippians 1, but just all of the book of Philippians is that it's Paul's most upbeat letter, which is very intriguing because Paul's most encouraging, upbeat letter, it's arguably, and most Bible scholars would believe this and argue this point, that it's actually the most upbeat letter in the entire Bible. Yet Paul is in prison, he's in chains, and he's facing a death sentence. So why is it that Paul is writing this encouraging, joy-filled letter in some of the worst possible circumstances that could possibly happen in life? Well, again, it's all about perspective. Now, we all want to be happy, right? How many of us want to be happy? Raise your hand. Come on, that's right. A little bit of participation is always a good thing. We all want to be happy. As a matter of fact, our culture tells us that if you're happy, then your life is good. And most people would argue that is the goal of life, is to live a happy, joy-filled life. And see, we look at happiness in all kinds of interesting places, and we want it, and we think we can find it maybe in our careers, maybe in the positions that we hold, maybe our kids, maybe our job, or maybe the sports that kids are involved in, or the vacations that we go in, or the homes that we purchase. We think, man, those are the things that are going to make me happy. Those are the things that are going to give me fulfillment. However, today we're going to find that Paul is going to show us that happiness isn't what we think it is. And more importantly, it isn't found where we think we normally find it, okay? Happiness isn't what we think it is, and it's not found where we actually think it's to be found. Before we get too far, I want to quickly define the term happiness as it pertains to this letter, because that's incredibly important. Paul actually never uses the term happiness. Instead, he uses a term called joy. So he doesn't use happiness, he uses joy. And there is a difference. And I think really, this is kind of the overarching point that I'm going to try to drive home today, is to know the difference between happiness and joy. For instance, happiness is external. And what I mean by that is it's outside of you. Okay, it really has nothing to do with what you can control. It's just happening outside, externally from us. For instance, a couple of weeks ago, 4th of July weekend, Sheetz gas station. I woke up early that morning. Sheetz gas station had gas for $1.76. How many of you went and stood in line to get $1.76 gas? It was incredible, okay? Now, when I was there, no one was awake yet. But about 10 o'clock, the line started getting long. We had a party we went to that evening, and lo and behold, the lines were still long. And what boggled my brains were people were standing in line. People were not getting mad. They were not throwing a fit. They were excited. They brought umpteen zillion gas cans. They filled up every car that they owned. And why were they happy? Right? Why were they waiting in line and happy about it? Because something good was happening to them. They were saving a few dollars. They could not believe that gas was as cheap as it was, right? But here's the thing. That unexpected discount, that had nothing to do with them. It happened to them. They did not cause it. It was a situation that happened to them. And let's face it, in our culture, when things are good, you're good, right? When everything's firing on all cylinders, you want me to prove my point? Just look at it. Just look at our government and the election process. When things are great, you're happy. When things aren't great, you're not happy with the guy, right? That's just how it works. That's how life works in general. But when things are not good, what tends to happen? You're not good. So when things are good, you're good. When things are not good, you're not good. It's like a boat on a wave. Think of that with me. When the wave goes up, the boat goes up. When the wave goes down, the boat goes down. But here's the thing. That has nothing to do with you. You cannot determine any of those things, right? It's outside of our control. Now, sometimes we can affect some of the outcomes, but truth be told, most of the times we can't. Okay, we cannot. Now, again, we have influence, but we cannot control outcomes. So that's not where we will find happiness. Because if you're looking for happiness there, you are wanting to live a life that you are at the mercy of what is happening around you. However, joy is very different. Joy is eternal or internal, okay? It's an internal thing. Joy is not based upon circumstances, but it's based upon the condition of our hearts. Let me explain. You can experience joy even on the worst days and even in some of the toughest circumstances that life throws at you. Let me give you an example. How many of you have ever seen two different people go through the same circumstances, and yet one person doesn't go through it very well at all, kind of downtrodden, not real excited. The other person goes through it, and they're joy-filled, and they have a great attitude. Have you ever seen that? And you wonder, what is it that's different about the one person versus the other? Someone may be walking through cancer. Someone walking through a miscarriage, maybe losing their job, a divorce, serious things that happen in life, yet they approach them completely different. One is angry, one is bitter, one is full of resentment, one is joyful, one is kind, one is positive. See, what is happening to them doesn't impact what's happening to their core, and that's what matters. Typically, the people that are bitter are allowing what happens to them mess with the core of who they are. Now, in 2 Corinthians, Paul writes a different letter to a different church, but here's some words that he gives in chapter 4, verses 16 and 17. That is why we never give up. Though our bodies are dying, our spirits are being renewed every single day. For our present troubles are small and won't last very long, Paul says. Yet they produce for us a glory that vastly outweighs them and will last how long? Forever. It will last forever. See, it's this idea of joy outweighing happiness. Now, let me just give you a couple of other examples that I think are important. One, happiness is based on circumstance. It's based on what is happening. And the interesting root word, okay, the Latin root word for happiness, you know what it is? It's luck. Okay, that's the root word, the Latin root word for happiness. However, joy is different. Joy is based on a decision. It's something that you decide in advance of how you're going to attack something. It's a choice that you make. Maybe a better way to put it is it's a conscious decision not to let things that happen to you control how your attitude is. I shared back in 2021 in our Live Free Travel Light series this illustration, but it drives the point home. It's a story of a tribal chief who told his young grandson, was kind of giving his grandson some wisdom about the human condition. And he was basically telling him a parable. And he said, son, there are two wolves inside of each and every one of us. One wolf is good, one wolf is bad. One fights for anger and greed and jealousy and rage. The other one fights for kindness and love and gentleness and joy. These two wolves fight it out every day. And young man, it is up to you to decide which one wins. And his grandson sort of sitting there trying to figure this thing out says, Grandpa, so how do I know which one wins and how do I know which one to choose? And the grandpa simply said, the wolf you feed is the wolf that will win. The wolf you feed is the wolf that will win. See, in a nutshell, that's the key to experiencing ongoing joy. Which one are you going to feed? Are you going to feed happiness because it's based on circumstances? Or are you going to feed joy because it's based on a condition of your heart? See, you feel whatever it is that you want to be, or you feed whatever it is that you want to be strong. And it will ultimately win the battle. I love what Abe Lincoln said. He said, these are some wise words. Most folks are about as happy as they make their minds up to be. Isn't that true? It's a choice that you get to make. It's a true statement because it comes down to a choice, a habit that we develop. Long-term joy has absolutely nothing to do with your circumstances. It doesn't. Some of the happiest people I know do not have a lot, all right? Some of the most wealthy people I know that seem to have everything life seems to offer are absolutely miserable because it comes down to our thoughts, our opinions, our attitudes of the circumstances of our lives. Over the years, there have been countless studies done on this. I want to share a couple of them with you. First was done, one was done by the University of Minnesota. I found this one fascinating. Discovered that there's amazingly little connection between one's life circumstances and one's predominant moods. So it has nothing to do with your life and what you're going through. The study examined people in all kinds of situations and circumstances. Some who had great fortune, as winning the lottery or having well-paying jobs. Others who had great misfortune. Maybe they had health problems. They lost the use of their leg. They lost a family member, something significant. And they discovered that the overwhelming majority of people on both ends of the spectrum, returned to their usual temperament within a year of the misfortune happening. So if they're typically a happy person, after a year they're gonna get back to being happy. If they're kind of a downtrodden person, they always kind of look at life the glass half empty, then they're gonna return to that in about a year. If they win the lottery, it doesn't make people any happier in the long run. Just like something bad happening to them doesn't make them any more unhappy. It's all in their attitude in which they approached life in general. Stanford University study revealed that happy people and unhappy people tend to have similar life experiences. I think this is important to note. It's not that happy people experience one success after another, and unhappy people experience one bad thing after another. Their lives, this study showed, were pretty much the same in all aspects. The difference is, the study concluded that the average unhappy person, don't miss this, it's worth writing down, it's worth taking a note of, spends more than twice as much time thinking about unpleasant events as they do pleasant events. While the happy people tend to think about things that brighten their day and their personal outlook on life. That's their focus. Research done by Richard Davidson at the University of Wisconsin shows that people who have high levels of brain activity in their left prefrontal cortex, tend to experience feelings of joy, optimism, and energy. Yet people with high levels of brain activity in their right prefrontal cortex tend to experience pessimism, sadness, and anxiety. Every person, he said, tends to side one way or the other. It's kind of like a factory default setting in our brain, It's just sort of our natural wiring. But here's what Dr. Davidson discovered. If you make a habit of thinking positive, joy-filled, uplifting thoughts, you can actually reset your factory default settings to the positive side of the brain. And he proved it in this extensive study. You can become naturally joy-filled. You can be a naturally happy individual if you get in the habit of thinking positive, happy, joy-filled thoughts. The bottom line is, joy is a habit. It's a choice that you make, and we see this in Paul's life. We see this playing out in the book of Philippians. It doesn't really matter what kind of circumstances that you face in life. It has nothing to do with that. It doesn't really matter what kind of resources you have. That's not ultimately what makes you happy or not happy. It matters what you habitually think about and the kind of attitude that you habitually adopt. The bottom line is this: joy will not find you, because joy is not looking for you. The question is, are you looking for it? Joy is not going to be something that just happens to you in your life. If you want to be happy, you need to recognize this one thing, and that is that joy is a choice you make, and more importantly, it's a habit you develop. And it's so impactful that it can actually rewire the brain. And Paul's going to show us this in this passage today, that it's not the circumstances that you're going in, but it's what you're dealing with and how you're dealing with the things that are happening to you in life. So I want to talk about 3 choices that you have to make in order to cultivate joy. And the first one is this. We see this in Paul's life. Start by saying thanks to God. It's first and foremost. Now, I know it sounds simple, but the truth is, it's something that we need to do. Paul writes in Philippians chapter 1, verses 3 through 6. Every time I think of you, so every time you come to mind, I give thanks to my God. Whenever I pray, I make my request of all of you with joy, he says. For you have been my partners in spreading the good news about Christ from the time you first heard it until now. And I am certain that God, who began a good work within you, will continue his work until it is finally finished on the day when Christ returns. Notice the proximity of these 2 words, thanks and joy. There's a connection, all right? being thankful and being joy-filled. My life verse is 1 Thessalonians 5, 16 through 18. And it's simply this: be joyful always, pray continually, give thanks in all circumstances, for this is God's will for you in Christ Jesus. All right, be joyful always, pray continually, and give thanks. Joy and thanks go hand in hand. Hear me. You can't say, God, thank you for this job, and then remain a disgruntled employee. You can't. If you're genuinely joy-filled about what God is blessing you with, then you can't do both. You can't say, God, thank you for my spouse, and then remain critical of them. You can't say, God, thank you for my life, and then complain about every inconvenience that comes your way. See, when you start thanking God, when you start looking at the life that you have and thanking Him day in and day out for those little things, you get this perpetual state of joy, not a perpetual state of dissatisfaction, right? That you're opening the door to looking at your life with a perspective of joy. And there's always things happening around you, okay? These things will not go away. Guess what's coming with the presidential campaign? You're not going to be able to change it. It doesn't matter. It's how you engage with it, all right? Your spouse, guess what, is still going to make you mad. Can I get an amen? Right? It's going to happen. Why? Because you're two human beings. Your boss is still going to expect too much of you. That's just the way it works. Your body is still going to ache. I know some of you can throw an amen on that one, right? You get up, your body aches, and it's like, oh, here's an idea. Oh, my back, my body, oh, this or that. Or like, hey, God, I'm breathing air today. Thanks, right? I get another day for my body to ache. Isn't that different, right? Just look at perspective a different way. So if you want, you can waste all of your energy asking God, why is this happening to me? You really can, and I believe it's an energy waster. Why isn't this different? Why isn't this easier? Or we can begin to change our perspective and thank God for the things that we do have. Just think for a minute. Right now, what do you have that you're thankful for? All of a sudden, thoughts just start flooding your mind. All these little things that come. And the more that you think about these things, the more you can nurture joy, the more you can nurture contentment, the more you can be happy with what it is that God is giving you. There are thousands of things that are beautiful and incredible that happen to our lives each and every day, but yet isn't it interesting that most people focus on the negative? So the question is, do you take the time to notice them, and do you take the time to thank God for them? Which leads to the second thing that Paul is going to talk about. Always look for the hidden benefit. There's always a hidden benefit in everything that we do. Henry Nouwen wrote these words. He says, joy does not simply happen to us. We have to choose joy and keep choosing it every single day. It's a choice. And this is exactly what Paul did when he wrote Philippians. He's stuck in prison. He's chained to a prison guard. He could have easily, oh, woe is me, woe is me, woe is my life. Oh my gosh, this stinks, this isn't fair. Why can't I be out? Why can't I do? Paul just looked at it as an opportunity to continue to move the mission forward. Instead of saying, hey, this horrible stuff is happening to me, Paul's like, what can I do to move God's mission forward? See, the situation may not be good, but listen, something good, something incredible is going to come out of this. In fact, he says it in Philippians 1, verses 12 through 14. And I want you to know, my dear brothers and sisters, that everything that has happened to me here has helped to spread the good news. For everyone here, including the whole palace guard, knows that I am in chains because of Christ. And because of my imprisonment, most of the believers here have gained confidence and boldly speak God's message without fear. You know what that was right there? That was just Paul getting up in the morning and making a choice to look at the positive things that are happening instead of the negative things that are happening. Since I'm in prison, this message hasn't been silenced. Since I'm in prison, I'm encouraging you, and you're now spreading the gospel to the world around you. Since I've been in here, more and more prisoners have become bold in their faith. See, in life, there doesn't seem to be a day go by. Let's just be real for a minute. There doesn't seem to be a day go by that some bit of bad news doesn't get dumped in your lap, right? And some jobs and some situations and some roles that you play in life, it just seems like bad news after bad news after bad news. But your perspective of it matters. How you approach it really does matter. We use this all the time here. I'm going to keep saying it because I believe it to be true. I think when life begins to throw curveballs, you have to begin to ask questions like this. Make it a habit to ask God, God, what are you saying to me? What are you trying to show me in this? Not, God, it's unfair, but what is it that you're trying to show me? And then, what am I going to do about it? What action item are you going to do to move towards leaning into joy and not leaning into the negativity of woe is me? See, Paul has this attitude, and he applied it to his colleagues in ministry. He applied it to the people at Philippi. He applied it to every opportunity he could. And see, today we have the advantage of history. They didn't really have the advantage of history back in the day, but we have the advantage of being able to look back at Paul's life, and we realize that Paul had a significant role in church history. 3/4 of the New Testament was written by him. However, it wasn't like many people in those days knew that about Paul. In fact, there were a lot of believers that weren't happy with Paul. Paul was a Jew. We're going to talk about this a little bit later. He was a Pharisee, and he later became a follower of Jesus. He kind of left his Jewish faith, and he went after pursuing Jesus and wanting people to pursue Jesus, and a lot of people did not like his theology. A lot of these people were broken and selfish and insecure, and they did not like Paul, and they wanted to stop his ministry, and they were happy that he was in prison. They were happy that he was in chains. While he was in chains, because this never happens today, right? They were spreading rumors about him. They were saying things that they weren't even for sure were true. And the truth is, we've all been there, right? How many of you, just by a show of hands, you've had somebody say something untrue about you? I know I have. There are times that people say things that aren't even remotely true. They've created a narrative about you that isn't even close to the truth. See, I think most of the time this harsh criticism, as I've kind of slowed down and try to look at things from a 40,000-foot perspective, oftentimes it's the insecurity and pain that the other person is going through, or the insecurity that the person has in themselves. So they have to look out around them to figure out, how can I cut somebody else down because I need to cope with, or I haven't coped with the things that I'm dealing with. So they tear others down in order to build themselves up. Now, Paul was in prison. Paul was in prison many different times. And those who opposed him, all right, were spreading, they were evangelizing what they believed to be true. And it wasn't necessarily the gospel as Jesus intended it to be. It wasn't the good news that we're talking about. But here's Paul's perspective, which I found very interesting in verses 15 through 18. It's true that some are preaching out of jealousy and rivalry, but others preach about Christ with pure motives. They preach because they love me, for they know that I have been appointed to defend the good news. Those others do not have pure motives as they preach about Christ. Now look at how Paul spins this. They preach with selfish ambition, not sincerely intending to make my chains more, or not sincerely intending to make my chains more painful to me. But that doesn't matter. And then he says, whether their motives are false or genuine, the message about Christ is being preached either way, so I rejoice, and I will continue to rejoice because the message of God is moving forward. Let's just say he could have easily been motivated by selfish ambition, right? He could have easily gotten downtrodden. He could have easily played the defense game, but he didn't. Instead, Paul looks at the hidden benefit, whether their motives are false or genuine. Here's the reality. The message of Jesus is being spread, and that's good news. See, I'm guessing where you work, there's someone that you know or that you work with or that you do life with, that they have been upset with you and they have not liked you. Maybe they've decided to try and take credit that you deserve. Maybe they have a way of getting out of responsibility and it ends up getting dumped in your lap. Maybe they have a way of making snide remarks about you when you don't do something right. Maybe they have a way of gloating when you make a mistake. I'm guessing there's someone at work like that because it seems that every office in the world has at least one. And if you're not careful, you'll find yourself spending a good portion of each and every day stressed out about what someone else is doing. My dad used to say, you're allowing them to live rent-free in your head. Stop it. Walk away from it. Maybe it's that backstabbing guy at work. Maybe it's that over-demanding client. Maybe it's that unappreciative spouse. Maybe it's that irresponsible teenager. We all have things in life. And if you focus on what they're doing, then what ends up happening is you let people rob you of your joy. You'll let them steal your happiness. And there's it's so much better to say, look, I can't control what that person does. I can't control what that person feels or thinks or acts on. But what I can do is I can trust God to handle all of that, and I'm going to have a positive perspective. Another way to look at it is when someone speaks badly or gossips or hurt you, then you can either do one of two things, okay? You can become fixated on their motives, or you can be focused on the hidden benefit. And that's exactly what Paul decided to do. He looked at the big picture. He flew up to 40,000 feet and he said, look, the gospel is still moving forward, right? It doesn't matter really what's happening. It doesn't matter that they think bad thoughts about me. It's not going to stop the message of Jesus going forward. Paul said in Romans chapter 8, verse 28, he is still at work causing all things to work together for good. God is always at work, and he's always causing all of the things that you're going through to work for good. The question is, do we have the right perspective as we're approaching them? Because if you're just expecting life to turn out good and always work to your benefit, then you're leaning into the happiness category, and your emotions will go with the waves of the ocean, right? And you want to stay away from that. So always look for the hidden benefit, which leads to the third thing that Paul talks about, and that is realize true joy is only found in a relationship with God. True joy, not happiness. I'm not talking about happiness here. There's a lot of things in this world that give us momentary happiness. They do. Okay, the approval of people, it feels good until all of a sudden they don't like you anymore. And isn't that funny? Stuff and experiences feel great until they wear out and the week comes to an end, right? That dream vacation you look back on, you have fond memories, but man, 7 days and boom, it's over. Disney seemed like the happiest place on earth until you got home and you realized that you have to mortgage your house to pay for that trip. Maybe you can remember this quote, maybe you can't, but I think it's a really good one. Jim Carrey said this. He says, I think everyone should get rich and famous and do everything that they've ever dreamed so they can see that it's not the answer. Isn't that good? See, that's what we think. We think, man, if I just have a little bit more money, if I just have a higher paying job, if I can just have a bigger house, if I can just drive this car, then I'm going to be happy. Hear me, you're not. That's not where happiness, and hear me, that is definitely not where joy is. We cannot ever forget that where our joy is found determines how long it lasts. I'm going to say that again. Where our joy is found determines how long it lasts. Paul finishes this passage with this statement found in verse 19. He says, for I know that as you pray for me and the Spirit of Jesus Christ helps me, this will lead to my deliverance. It doesn't really matter what happens in this prison cell. I know that God's got this. Paul's like, there's something profound and deep and durable about a relationship with Christ. Let me tell you what it is. It doesn't run out. It doesn't dry up. It doesn't get used up. He'll always be there through thick and through thin. The only way that we can continue to fill our joy tank is by magnifying God in the problems, because ultimately, he has the last word. See, as we come and as we worship God, something happens. I believe something divine happens in this space. We come together and we worship and we begin to chase after God. And see, my fear is that's not what happens sometimes. My fear is people come in and they want to have an experience because they want to make themselves feel happy. And maybe, just maybe, our perspective needs to change, that we come in and we begin to pursue God. See, some of the most joy-filled people in the Bible had horrible things happen to them. But you know what they continued to do? They continued to worship God. Let's look at Job. Job lost everything. Lost his family. Lost every possession he owned, his home, his fields, his livestock, everything. And Job's words are, the Lord gives and the Lord takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Mary, the mother of Jesus. She's a teenage girl. She's not married. She winds up pregnant. I want to talk about the gossip train. She's got to feel internally that her life is just completely coming unglued. Most people didn't believe her. She's carrying around this baby. She knew people were going to be talking behind her back. Then Jesus, her little boy, is born in a stable on a cool evening. Yet the scriptures tell us she treasured all of these things in her heart. See, what were they doing in those moments? What were they doing in those moments when things seemed to be coming unglued? Now, don't misunderstand. I'm not saying that you can't have sadness. I'm not saying that you can't deal with difficult circumstances, because hear me, life happens. That doesn't mean that you can't find the joy in the midst of the sadness and in the difficulty and in the grief and in the hurt. So we have to understand that worship is not when a bunch of people get together whose lives are absolutely perfect and we praise Jesus and the stuff that we have. That's not what this is about. You know what the church is about? It's about a bunch of unhealthy, broken people coming together, realizing that we can't do it without him. That we really don't have any control of anything in our life, and that he does, and we come to fall at his feet and to worship his name. There are many times I say, now, God, I can't figure this out. I feel like I'm a really smart guy, but this one's out of my control. And I just need your help. See, when the rest of the world is raging, the church should be rejoicing. When the rest of the world is complaining, the church should be filled with gratitude. And the church is us, not this building. When the rest of the world is critical, the church should show up and be compassionate. When the rest of the world is tearing down, the church should be the one that's building up. When the rest of the world is canceling, the church should show up and be forgiving. When the rest of the world is fixated on happiness, we should be fixated on joy and where true joy is found. When the rest of the world is scrambling for identity, and hear me, they are scrambling for identity. The church should show up and be secure that knowing where true joy is found, that it's only found in a relationship with God. There's no other place at which it can be found. So this morning, I simply want to leave you with this. Where do you find joy? Do you find it in the circumstances of life that go up and down like the waves, or do you find it in the solid relationship of Jesus who never changes, never has, never will? Where do you find true joy in life?